Welcome to the Common Construct Podcast. This is episode 1, and I'm your host, David Morgan. Our guest today is Jamie Ginn. Jamie is a cybersecurity expert with OTM Cyber. We're going to talk about cybersecurity, the rise of artificial intelligence, the place and purpose of religion in our communities, and how we can structure our world to be safe, resilient, and sustainable for the next 400 years.
It's a tool, and how well you use the tool is going to determine what it does to you and what you're able to accomplish through it. We've got to quit making security, not just cybersecurity, but our own physical security and protecting humanity, part of the engineering and development process, part of the innovation process now. And until we get our head out of our phones, we're not going to do it. Slowly painting ourselves into a corner by building things that make life easier. And there's a point where life gets so easy that what's the point in living, right? Prioritize the human experience as a whole. If we truly value that, we will inevitably build our societies, our companies, our faith communities in a way that promotes that. I had flown inside the continental United States a few times, been to Mexico, when I say thing, but I didn't travel enough to really get culturally ingrained in some aspect of society. So that was it was a bit of a culture shock.
Yeah.
Say that way.
Yeah. Before the mission, did you spend some time in Utah, the training center there?
I had been, I was English speaking, so I was only there for 3 weeks, but I was at the Missionary Training Center in Provo, Utah for 3 weeks. And then I went out. But before that, I lived out there for a little while. I graduated high school a year early, kind of getting into doing some online schooling and trying to get my early stages of a career underway. And I moved out there for a little less than a year, but I actually worked at the Missionary Training Center in Provo while I was living out there. So that was a really neat experience. And it's a big part of who I am, big part of my identity. I will say, I think between Salt Lake City and Provo is overpopulated. I grew up on a farm in Mississippi, so that was a bit hard. Everybody's right next to each other, packed in between the mountains, so I didn't like that.
Yeah. There's a lot more people in Utah, especially around Salt Lake and Provo.
And now they've got the Silicon Slopes building up out there, which is this whole tech movement just outside of Draper, kind of going towards Provo in that area. And it's interesting. Every time I go out there, right, this industry's moving and the tech industry's moving in and coming there, and you can see the houses starting to go up the sides of the mountains, right, as you drive there. They've run out of space. You see them slowly building up, into the foothills and up the sides, because where else can you go? But it's interesting to see it change in that way.
It is, yeah. I've only been out there once as a kid. We were on a road trip out to California and stopped in one of the national parks, and I was too young. I don't remember which one.
One of the ones in Utah?
Yeah, one of the ones in Utah. We stopped in Colorado. We stopped in Utah. We stopped at Grand Canyon.
Oh, you saw all the great things.
Yeah, we saw all the things and came back. We took a week going out there, and then 2 weeks there and a week coming back, a different route to hit different sites.
Nice.
So
great trip.
Yeah, it was a great trip. But I remember Salt Lake. Nobody had told me about that before we got there.
Yeah.
And I was like, what is this?
Yeah, it's a weird thing. You're in the middle of the desert, right? And all of a sudden there's this massive civilization right out there in the middle of everything.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of the reason why they did it to begin with, right? They were trying to get away from everything, but it is an anomaly. Right? It shouldn't exist. If you think about how cities are typically built and what starts them, it is an anomaly in the United States for sure.
Yeah. I think that's a good spot to jump in here. So I'm David Morgan, and this is the Common Construct podcast here, and we're recording in Petal, Mississippi, near Hattiesburg, and I'm here with Jamie Ginn.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for coming, making this long drive all the way over here. Yeah.
So Jamie is the founder of OTM Cyber, a cybersecurity firm that's dedicated to building secure, resilient technology environments for critical infrastructure and organizations that operate daily at the edge of digital risk. He got his bachelor's from Olympic College, master's from Rochester Institute of Technology, both in computer and information systems security and information assurance. He also holds an honorary doctorate of cybersecurity from Providence University. Jamie believes that the defining challenge of our era is balancing rapid technological growth with the preservation of humanity, our relationships, faith, mental wellness, and community identity. In an industry often captivated by what is shiny and new, he argues that real progress requires foresight, ethical constraints, and security built in from day one. His perspective is shaped by his faith, his experience founding a technology company, and years of service in both the public and private sectors. He approaches technology not just as an engineer or entrepreneur, but as someone who believes innovation must strengthen human beings, not displace or diminish them. And Jamie, I just want to say thank you for coming on to the show. This is our first episode, and as we've been talking, I've known you for a few years now, seen you at different things, and we've talked a few times. And so I really appreciate the perspective that you can bring here to this first episode of The Common Construct.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here. I'm honored that you thought to have me on and look forward to our discussion today.
So the concept for the listeners of The Common Construct is that the civilization that we live in, the institutions and the society, is something that is created by humanity. It's a shared construct, hence the common construct. That what we have is only in existence as long as we choose for it to be. That everything requires us to make the effort to keep it alive. And without it, it simply goes away because it never truly existed. I think there's some interesting things along that vein where it's kind of miraculous, the things that we've been able to create that seem so real, so physical in our minds, and yet don't actually exist. The government, I think, is a prime example of that, right?
Yeah.
The government itself isn't a thing. It doesn't exist. We have assets assigned to a made-up entity that exists because we've all decided it exists because it serves the common good and the common purpose. And I think we see that across industries. We see that in markets. We see that in technology. We see that in our civic organizations, corporations. Just about everything that we do, if you were to look at it, if you were an alien species studying us, it would seem like we have, like ants, a miraculous ability to order ourselves, and they would never see the institutions. They make up a big part of our life, not just institutions for entities, but also institutions like marriage, institutions like traditions, like our holidays and our religion. We're able to do this and embody them with almost physical traits, right? We see entropy develop in these things that don't exist, right? It's not just an idea that we have and we keep in our minds, but because it's a shared construct between everyone, we see that they start to take on a life of their own between all of us. So the purpose of the common construct is for us to have these conversations and to talk about what those constructs are, to deliberately put effort into maintaining them, but also deciding and determining and having conversations about what constructs, what institutions should exist so that we can have that society that benefits man, right? And a lot like what I was just saying about you is we need to strengthen human beings, not displace them or diminish them. And that's what we're looking at. And so today we're going to talk a lot about that and kind of focus on your expertise in cybersecurity, but also your faith and your identity and the things that you see as a everyday guy living in the world and trying to make it through with a family and put food on the table.
Yeah, I'm excited to have that discussion because I think often our perspectives shift over time, especially as we're exposed to, or as we have different experiences or as we hear different perspectives, right? And I do believe it's important for us as humans, as society, as citizens of the world, I guess you could say, to hear each other out. to try to relate, to empathize in some kind of way, because that shapes how we govern ourselves and how we choose to act and interact with each other.
I think we kind of are almost on autopilot in many ways.
Yeah.
And I think many people have not realized how easy it is to other people, to make them an other group.
Mm-hmm.
How easy it is to hate things that are different.
Yeah.
And I think there's value in the different perspectives that people have. Society is too complicated for any one person or any one group even really to understand and grasp every aspect of it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we see that in culture too. We see American culture looks very different than Chinese culture.
Absolutely. But I think the problem often arises where you have people who have had no exposure to other cultures or other societies, and then they operate in this vacuum mentality, right? And I think that is especially a place where if you exist in that space, it's extremely easy to other people, right? To classify someone as other or as not me. And then once you can dehumanize someone in some kind of a way to strip their humanity because of a difference, I think that's where we see in society it becomes a lot easier to commit violence against certain groups of people or to pass laws that are committing in some kind of ways harm against certain groups of people.
I think one of the things that I've seen in my public service and now my consulting career and my political career, if you can call it that, is a tendency to not want to deal with other people as adults and as individual agents, but to pass rules and try to enforce things instead of talking to people.
Yeah. Conversation's so important. It's so important. But it's so easy to do that in the modern technology space because I gave a talk at church about this recently on one of my assignments, that because of modern technology and the way that it so easily captivates the mind, I think it has a tendency to draw you out of humanity, right? When you don't have to look somebody in the eyes, when you don't have to watch their body language and how you speak differently to them when it's void of human interaction, right? People get very brave on the internet. They say things that they would never say probably face to face. But if you live in that reality, right, you're withdrawing yourself from the human experience as a whole. You're separating yourself, and then you're defining things that control you that really don't exist, as you say, right? I think you made a really good point about that early on, that you're letting concepts, ideas, environments that aren't real dictate how you act and interact with reality and with humanity as a whole. And it can be very dangerous. Technology is super powerful, right? And it's that two-edged sword, right? It has great benefit. I see great things come out of technology. But by its very nature and operating in the cybersecurity space, I see the worst side of the internet. I see things that people get arrested for. I am able to follow patterns and see how people devolve into states where they would be willing to kill someone because of interactions they've had for years online, right? Marriages fall apart, families fall apart, physical health falls apart. I'm guilty of it. I sit in front of a computer all day, every day, right? It's a hard thing to stay active when you live in this virtual reality. You don't need a VR headset to live in a virtual reality. You just need a computer or a phone, really just a phone.
Yeah, and just, I suppose I shouldn't say this because I don't do it, but I feel like getting up every hour or every 2 hours and walking around just is not the same. It's a very different environment than what humans have ever been in. It's just sitting there. And
yeah.
We're not very well adapted to it. And I think even if you are getting up and moving, it's certainly better than not. But I find myself, I also sit at a desk most of the day, and I sit there and I stare at the screen and I do things and I, move worlds around and, do some amazing things with the technology that we have. But it's not the physical world, and it's not real people.
Yeah. I think though, the problem is that it's like that frog in boiling water where you don't realize that's what's happening to you because it's so gradual and it's so subtle that you slowly start to slip off into the state where all of a sudden you're in a fake world, in a fake reality, right? You're existing in the online space. Without getting too deep into it, but you see that with the political division in the country today. You're interacting with people that you don't live next door to oftentimes. You're interacting with a group of people who interacts on the internet, and they're far away. So your local politics probably aren't conflicting with each other if you would just leave each other alone on the internet, right? But you view this other group, as you said, the other than, as the enemy, as the object of your frustration or whatever it is. And it's super polarized, especially right now. Climate's really bad. I think the internet is a big cause of that, and the rhetoric that comes out of the internet.
I agree. And like you said, the things that people are willing to say. I remember growing up, the internet was very different.
Yeah.
Different beast, right? I did plenty of things on the internet that I probably shouldn't have in that kind of world that you were talking about, right? A number of my friends that I knew only online, some of them I knew in person, but a lot of them went to jail. And I did not. And I don't think I ever did anything that would warrant that either, but it would have been easy to get wrapped up in that. But the environment was not hostile. It was additive. It was more interest-based. There was a specific environment that I got into, not as a bad thing, just there was a website with a forum, and it was kind of my first interaction with forums. It was kind of really the first thing I was doing on the internet, was just a fan website for Stargate SG-1.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And just talking to people from all over the country, all over the world, just about this shared interest of this television show, and talking about aspects of the show. And I don't know if you're familiar with the show, but for any of the audience, it's a science fiction television show that I think was a step above some of the other stuff on the TV at the time, and certainly above the TV now, where some of the bigger ethical topics came up. A lot like Star Trek, where you have an ethical conundrum that happens to be solvable in 41 minutes.
Right.
And
makes you think.
Yeah.
Right?
And to be able to talk about that with people from different perspectives and tell stories and engage. And then even like AOL chat rooms and IRC, and it was very helpful.
Yeah, and cordial.
Yeah,
right?
like everybody was nice. And, I know that there were some predators on the internet, but by and large, everybody was helpful and they'd help you figure stuff out. It was a different place.
Yeah.
And we've got similar spaces with things like Facebook and Facebook groups and Telegram and Discord and things. And I just it's not the same environment.
It's not. And I don't know why it has shifted so much. Maybe it is because now people are more conditioned to live in the abstract, right? There was an old adage, especially during the early information age, when you were having all these books and philosophers coming about, and they would say, we're losing wisdom to knowledge, because instead of having this thing through this experience and sheer grit and willpower, right now you can just go read a book and it's all there, right? And that was the thing. And then we went from, okay, we've lost wisdom to knowledge. Now we're losing knowledge to information, because you don't have to know the thing anymore. You can look it up in a few seconds. So, and now I would even say, if you take it a step further, we're losing that information to automation. Now you don't even have to have the information anymore. You can make an agentified AI bot that does the thing for you in some kind of automated way. And I think the big ethical question that I don't know if we fully addressed is, what is that doing to society as a whole? I don't think the answer is to just throw it all away. The technology's good. I spoke at an AI conference recently, and there were the polar sides in the audience. You could tell the people were like, oh, this is evil. This is the government spying on me. They're going to, and then there were the other people that are like, I use it for everything. This is my whole life now. And the answer is always somewhere in the middle. It's a tool, and how well you use the tool is going to determine what it does to you and what you're able to accomplish through it. But it shouldn't replace your own effort, and it shouldn't replace your own ability to think and process and know and experience and live and feel. And I think that's the problem with technology sometimes, is we're slowly painting ourselves into a corner by building things that make life easier. And there's a point where life gets so easy that what's the point in living, right? We're seeing a major mental health epidemic, especially with my generation, the generation under us, right? Where major mental health problems. And I think that the internet and our modern technology is a contributing factor in that. I talked to a psychologist recently, and they were talking about counseling and meeting with people who struggle with anxiety, right? In some kind of way. And they said, one of the things we have them do is, to look around and name 3 things that they can see, physical things in their environment. Name 3 things they can smell. Name 3 things they can hear. And I asked, so what's the point of that? And they said it draws them back into reality, because they're in a headspace that's void of the physical reality. And they're conditioned to live in that space because of the technology that they interact with all the time. So I think it's having a major impact that we as a society are still wrestling with and trying to figure out what to do. And heaven forbid, the government trying to figure out what to do with it, right? I've watched some of these congressional hearings where they'll have technologists on a panel and they'll ask them crazy questions. Where as a technologist myself, I hear them like just cringing, like, how does my iPhone know that I like to eat Honeycrisp apples in the morning, right? It's crazy stuff. And I'm like, what are we doing? How are these folks going to legislate this technology when they have no idea what it's doing or how it works? It's a problem.
Yeah,
it's a problem.
It is. And I think the literacy and understanding of it, I think, is one of the major elements of computers generally, but AI specifically, where you get a lot of people who just fundamentally don't understand it. I was having a conversation with my mother-in-law, and no offense to her, she doesn't spend the time, looking at this, and she's just saying what she hears.
Yeah.
She said she was fine with AI except for the ones that can learn. And I had to explain there aren't any that can learn, right? They're training.
Right.
It's a really complicated algorithm. It's a really complicated averaging system.
It is, but it's still artificial.
Yeah, it's artificial, and it mimics, it's predictive algorithm, but it's a complicated average with a weighted average system.
Yeah.
At the core of it.
Artificial intelligence is still artificial. And I think that's where people get confused or concerned about the technology in general, is they think it's going to be the next iRobot or whatever. It's going to come in, it's going to take over everything, kill everybody. And watch me eat my words in 10 years, but I don't think that's the direction we're going.
I'll tell you what my concern in that sense, my biggest concern with it is that a lot of what it is doing, especially for the large language models, it's trained on material. And all of the material we've ever made about AI says that it's supposed to take over and kill us all.
That's a fair point.
So if we give it control over something and it does what it thinks it should do, it will complete the pattern and take over and kill us all.
If it follows the science fiction model, right?
Right, yeah. Which is the only thing it's ever going to learn about, right? It's not making its own decision.
Yeah.
It's going to follow the pattern. And that's
an interesting takeaway. Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah. It's true, right? And it's a complicated algorithm. It's not God and it's not a demon, because I've heard people try to put it in both boxes, right? It is neither. It is a tool, and it would behoove us to learn how to make it safely and use it safely to better humanity and better society rather than do the opposite. But the problem is, I heard this analogy with electricity once. They said you could get electrocuted, and that could be the thing that makes you end up in the hospital. And then it very well might be an electric shock that brings you back to life when you're there. Electricity in and of itself is neither good nor bad. It's not inherently good nor evil. It's just something. And it can hurt you or help you. And depending on the circumstances, I view this technology the same thing. But it's super powerful. And the problem with powerful things is they can take you to the extreme on both sides of the table. They can, depending on how you use them. And I think that's ultimately what we're seeing society battle with now. The problem, I think, with technical innovation, especially as it is, there's a lot of money in the tech industry, right? I get it, right? I'm a founder of a cybersecurity company. We see it. I get offers from firms wanting to buy my company at least once a week. Not that all of them are great. Some of them are not, and I would not entertain them, right? But the money's attractive. As a human being, that equals, if nothing else, it equals security. Like if I have a lot of money, I can be more secure. And that's what we all ultimately want. We want safety and we want security. So oftentimes, right, that money drives you to the 5-yard line, and you build something to get a lot of money in a short period of time without any foresight for what does that look like at the 100-yard line or at the 200-yard line? What is this going to do when you get way out there? Because there's not much incentive to look at it that far out. Right. Generally, I know there are some engineers and technologists that are looking that far out in certain fields. But I mean, you take the pharmaceutical industry and others, right? It's how can we get the most money the quickest, in often cases, not all the time. And the quickest way is often, let's reduce symptoms. People will buy that right now. Sometimes over what's the long-term health effect, right? It's like the Big Mac cheeseburger. Tastes really good right now, but I'm not thinking about what it's going to do to me in the next week or 2 weeks or whatever. It's a problem.
It is. Well, I think that's one of the major goals here of this podcast, is to try to get us to think a little bit longer and at least start that conversation. Maybe, hopefully that'll spread. Yeah. And more people can do that. Long-term outcomes of technology, of any type. I think plastics is a good example too. Like there's a Roman story, it's probably apocryphal, of a guy who invented a clear glass that was indestructible, that he brought it to the Roman emperor, and the Roman emperor had him killed because it would stay there forever.
Yeah.
I don't think that there was probably a Roman emperor that was that intelligent, but
It's a good point though.
yeah,
Yeah.
It's a good point. And now we're suffering from plastics that never go away. And, we've got some hope and some enzymes and bacteria that might do something about it, but we've got, plastics in our ocean and plastics in our water. And it's a miracle product and material that can do amazing things that save people's lives. And, we use it to carry our groceries, and we use it for everything. Right.
It's true. It's in everything that we wear. It's in everything that we do. That was actually going to be my first major, and ended up changing, was polymer chemistry, the study of plastics and how they're made, right? These long chain artificial molecules, or I say artificial, but at least not naturally born, that do things, and you can engineer them molecularly to have the properties that you want them to have. And especially in the early days of polymer chemistry, there was no thought about this is all going to end up in the ocean in some giant floating island, and it's going to kill all the sea life. Now, I will say that industry specifically is probably a good example of where we're seeing more of a shift. Mm-hmm. Now there's even some legislation and laws where this has to be degradable in some certain period of time. So as you're engineering the molecular properties that you want this product to have, you have to consider these factors, but damage is done. So now what? Now what happens? Now what do you do? Yeah. I think our nuclear industry is another example of that, right? The potential to generate nuclear power and the impact it can have on society is great. It's huge, but nuclear waste is still a problem. We still don't really know what to do with it, right? We talked about shooting it off into space. We talked about burying it in the bottom of the ocean, locking it up in a vault in some mountain, and they've done all of those things in some way or another, except maybe not space. They've talked about it, but hopefully they don't start doing that. But I mean, we do these things, and then our children and their children are going to end up trying to figure out what to do about it. That's what
without necessarily the physical resources that we have potentially.
Yeah.
I think there's a long-term outlook that we need to have, especially when introducing things, but when making decisions on products and how we live. I think the long-term outcome on zoning regulations is a good example of that. Just generally choosing how we raise people. I think it's very easy to get caught up in a new technology. I think AI especially is it's very tempting for people, because the way in which some of the larger AI companies are training their models is by putting out these LLMs for general use, right?
Most people, when they think about AI now, they're thinking about LLM.
Which is personally, and I'm not an expert, but I know a little bit about it. But personally, I think is the area where it's probably the least useful. I think the temptation for a lot of people is that they've seen so many technologies come and they've missed the boat because there was a learning curve. And with AI, the learning curve is language, and it's within their capability, or they feel like it is.
They feel like it is. It seems more approachable,
right?
From a technical onboarding perspective than perhaps some other technologies that we put out there.
Right.
I was an instructor for CompTIA for a while, and they do a lot of technical certifications, right? So if you want to get a technical certification and being a network engineer, CompTIA has a track for that, right? You want to be a cybersecurity professional, there's a track for that. You want to be a Linux sysadmin professional, there's a track for that. Well, they just launched a new AI Plus, which is their artificial intelligence thing. Mm-hmm. And in their video that they came out with, I thought this was really important, or a really good way to say it, rather. They said, look, if you're a developer, if you're a coder, AI is not going to take your job. You can calm down. But the guy that knows how to use it, he is going to take your job, because he's going to use it to take your job, right? And I thought, there you go, right? So I think people see that, and they see it as a way to a tool that they can adopt, that they can use in a lot of ways. It helps you be more efficient and quicker at getting to the punch. I mean, we're using it in cybersecurity. We're using AI to help detect things that would have taken a human a lot longer to catch. Mm-hmm. And it's powerful in that way. The problem is, especially in cybersecurity, the threat actors, which is a fancy term for hackers, they're using it to write new malware, and they can do it way faster than they could without it. I did a presentation in North Alabama, and I did that live in the room. I pulled up an LLM chatbot, and we wrote malware together. I
Mhm.
said, I want to scan this network. I want anything that has this port open, and then I want you to try these default credentials. Let me know if you get in. And it did it. It had spit out a Python script. I ran the script, and bam, we were into 2 machines, right? In a matter of a few minutes. Granted, their network wasn't set up very good. Hopefully, most people wouldn't have that issue. But it's a use case. It's speeding things up, if nothing else, especially in those industries. It's getting faster.
Yes, especially in the tedious work. I've used it for some light programming, just as a hello world kind of,
Yeah.
just to see it work. And I think my big takeaway was it was not clever. It wasn't beautiful.
Yeah.
There's no.
It's a bit clunky.
It's very clunky.
Yeah.
It took very roundabout ways to get to things.
Yeah.
But it got there. And when processing power is plentiful and hard disk space is plentiful,
Yeah.
then it doesn't necessarily matter, right? And we see that anyways with expanding size of programs.
Right. It's great for debugging too. You're just trying to get something to run and you keep hitting the wall and you throw it the error in the code. It's really good at telling you this is where it's breaking. Here's what you could do different, right? They made it very clunky on the back end, but you can get it to work and it keeps getting better, right? They're coming out with new models, and I know the whole Elon Musk thing, right? He's a very polarizing figure anyway, but his initial warning when OpenAI launches, he was like, well, you got to put the brakes on this stuff. Like this is, I've seen what this can do. And there's something to that, right? I think there is. And we've heard the worst cases, right? I know they talked about AI-induced psychosis has been a thing where maybe you're paranoid and you think someone is following you and you get on the chatbot and you say, this blue car, right? I took 2 turns. They're still behind me. I think this guy's looking at me. And there was a problem where some of the models would just support whatever your narrative was. It would say, yeah, you better get a gun or you better, do something. And it would cause this problem. There was another situation where someone was suicidal, a teenager. And they went on this whole thing about, my parents, they want me to not do this or whatever. And it actually ended up telling the kid that you don't owe your parents life. You don't owe them your life. And it basically encouraged this juvenile to kill themselves. That's terrible. What have we built, right? That's awful. And now they're like, we're putting guardrails, we're doing the things. Like, yeah, but the damage is done. That's at least one life that's gone. Right?
Well, and then also how do you put guardrails on there without removing the humanity, right? As people become more and more reliant on it for thinking, like you were talking about a minute ago with the information and the data, and then, now it's doing the analysis. There are aspects of humanity that we don't necessarily want to lose that are not all happy, that are a necessary element of life, right? What is it? The Buddhists say that life is suffering.
Yeah.
And I'm,
you need some of that.
Not as a Buddhist belief, but like, I really believe that.
I
right?
agree with that as a tenet. Yeah.
Yeah. And that the purpose we get from life is trying to eliminate or diminish that suffering, and for ourselves and others, especially for others, I think.
Yeah.
And I worry about what a world would look like where we have, really censorship, right? I often talk about free speech is because we're a language species. We do a lot of our thinking through words, through language, right? And if we don't have the words for a thing, we can't think about it, right? And that's one of the big issues with diminishing vocabularies, right? They even talk about that in 1984, where they're trying to remove words. They have Newspeak because they're trying to eliminate the words, because eliminating the words eliminates the ability to think about it.
Yeah.
Right. And so I worry about that censorship, and then it's easy to see it in a book or in a newspaper, right? If you can know that it exists, you see that it's censored. But if you're doing something that doesn't exist, but it's being filtered, that's an ethical thing that I'm worried about in that sense, is losing the entire spectrum of human existence and life.
That's a fascinating concept. And I think we've seen some evidences of that, especially in some of the social media and online media forums where, for example, they'll censor the word suicide, right? Can't say that. So what do they all say? They'll say unalive.
Right, unalive.
Right? They're replacing words with other words to try to get around some of the stuff. But I think that's dangerous in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
I recognize there are certain behaviors that we don't want to encourage, but we need to discourage certain behavior, not by preventing people from discussing it, but by helping people realize it's not a good thing to do by discussing it.
Right.
Right. And I think it's a problem, right? I think that's a tenet of behaviorism, where we're really trying to do behaviorism. I thought about this recently in a little bit of a religious context, right? Because of this idea of all this online control and media stuff, right? You think about general religious worship, and I think we know as a whole, especially in the United States, religion is declining, right? Across the board. We see a lot of that. And I think there are probably a lot of factors that drive that. I think some of which are back when life was a little harder, we didn't have all of these great technologies that we have today. You needed something that made you feel more fulfilled, right? And that was God to a lot of people, however they defined God. And now that you feel like you don't need that anymore, right? Or you feel like I have nothing to want. What can I want? I need nothing. I'm never going hungry. I've got air and heat and somewhere to sleep. People see no need for God anymore, right? So I think that's part of it. I think the other thing is people have gotten uncomfortable with physical interaction. They don't want to go sit down in a group with other people. The social anxiety stuff is through the roof, right? So they don't want to go sit in a chapel. They don't want to go sit in a church with people and do these things. But I think there's something to be said from a religious aspect of a physical action to do something, right? Like take a Catholic mass, right? The sitting down, the standing up, taking something physically. These are physical actions, right? Communion, Latter-day Saint temple worship. All of these types of activities bring you back into yourself, I think, in a way where you have to touch something. You have to do something. You have to say something. It's not just headspace anymore, right? It's easy to get online and say, oh, yeah, I'll pray for you, right? It's easy to say that. Who's really doing it, though? And I don't know. Hopefully most of the people who say that are, but I think in a lot of cases it's just, oh, I made the social post. I know I care about that. I'm going to forget all about it and go back to watching reels or whatever I was doing. Technology makes it easy to do that. Another example I use for that, and I'll say this often, and I won't name the companies, but I think your imagination can take you there. Take your favorite platforms you use online and think, how much do I pay to use that, right? Any of the social media platforms. And you don't, right? There's no money going in. You're not paying a monthly subscription generally to use platform X or whatever. I say that metaphorically. I'm not talking about Twitter.
Yeah.
The old Twitter. I'm talking about X is a variable. But it's because you don't. And the reason why is because you are not their customer. You're the product that they're selling. They're running ads. Those are their customers. So the more they can keep you addicted, the more they can keep you online, the more they can keep you engaged, the more they can charge to run ads for whoever's selling whatever, right? So you're the product they're selling. And if you want to accept that relationship, I think there's a trade-off between privacy and convenience, and everybody has to make that decision for themselves. The problem I have is often people don't realize that's what they're doing. They don't realize that these things are taking their information and selling it to keep them addicted so that they can't pick their head up and see reality. And they don't realize that's what's happening. And that's where I have a problem. If it's informed consent, okay, I'm fine with it. You set the balance for yourself, but it's sneaky.
The way gambling captures the mind. There's been
Yeah.
a lot of good research on that. And it's one thing to walk into a casino and do it. And there's that level of informed consent, right? You know what you're doing.
I'm walking into the building. I know this is what I'm doing.
You know you're gambling. And especially with like Reels, right? That's been a big boon to social media's ability to keep you attached, right? It hits every element of gambling, and you're constantly swiping to see what you get next, and that dopamine hit.
Yeah.
How big it's going to be, and it never accomplishes anything.
It doesn't, and it affects your mental health in other negative ways that you don't foresee.
Yeah. It has a similar effect too to something I have experienced with the news media. And every time that I've had a decent amount of experience with the news media and local news and television, and every time I've been interviewed, the result has always been not what I said.
Yeah.
Right. They're using my words. They're not trying to twist it. Right. And I have encountered very similar things with Reels. Right. I'll get sucked in, and I get a lot of podcast content, right? And somebody may be listening to this in a reel.
Sure.
Because I'm going to promote it that way too.
Yeah.
Right?
Got to use the tools that you have. Yeah.
And I almost hate it, but that's the market, right?
Yeah.
That's where you find people. But every time I've done it and taken a short and then gone and found that podcast or that speech or the longer form that was cut out of, it's never the same, whether it's just context, even if they're trying to capture it, you can't capture a complex thought and put it and distill it into 20 seconds, 30 seconds. It thought is more complex, and it would be like taking a beautiful piece of art and cutting out an inch of it and saying, look how beautiful this is. And maybe that 1 inch square is beautiful,
Right.
but it doesn't begin to capture the entire art.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. Even
Yeah.
if you were trying to find the best 1 inch square to represent, like, you can have the best interest in it and not be able to capture what it is. So I think it's gambling.
Yeah, it is. That's a great way to put it, right? And you don't have to give up anything for it. I found, and I think most people would agree, but the things in life that are generally the most rewarding, deeply rewarding, they take some effort.
They do.
You got to put yourself out there and you got to sweat a little bit, metaphorically or not. And that's when you find the most rewarding things, right? There's no effort in these captivating reels and online things. It's by design. People are naturally inclined not to want to put effort out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
We want to find an easier path, but things that take effort are often the most rewarding.
Who would have imagined that we'd find something easier than a television show?
Yeah.
Right? Like that
But
used to
we
be the
did.
thing, like, we're brain rotting, we're watching a movie.
Yeah.
And like now it's not that uncommon for me to get off my phone and think I could have spent that time doing something productive, like watch a movie.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or
Who would have thought the movie would be more productive than that?
right.
But in a way,
I'd at least
right?
feel better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'd at least feel better, and maybe you're with some other people, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's analyzing some complex moral issue that you can relate to in the movie. The reels don't do that.
No.
That they don't. And it's a problem.
Here on The Common Construct, we're having conversations about building a society and institutions that will last for the next 400 years. To give perspective, we'll take a look at what was happening in the world 400 years ago. We're looking at January 4th through the 10th of the year 1626. In England, King Charles I of England was preparing for his upcoming coronation at the beginning of February. The nation was embroiled in a costly war against Spain, which was itself a small part of the larger 30 Years' War, which in turn was a reigniting of the 80 Years' War. The 30 Years' War, which started in 1618, would become one of the most deadly and destructive events in European history. The conflict stemmed from what was essentially a civil war over Christian infighting and control of the Holy Roman Empire. Charles I's chief advisor, George Villiers, 1st Duke of Buckingham, had just recently botched a naval expedition meant to capture ships of the Spanish treasure fleet laden with gold from the New World, and the king desperately needed a new parliament to grant him funds to continue the war, which they had denied him last year. The handling of this conflict would ultimately lead to the First and Second English Civil Wars, and the loss of important body parts for the king, namely his head. In the Americas, the Plymouth colony was only about 5 years old, the Pilgrims having landed in December of 1620 after fleeing religious persecution in England for not being the right kind of Protestant Christians, then fleeing the Netherlands as it became embroiled in the 30 Years' War. The first successful British colony in the Americas, Jamestown, had only been permanently occupied for about 16 years. The Virginia Company has recently had its charter revoked, and Virginia made a direct crown dependent after the Privy Council learned to do basic math and realized that only 18% of the 7,300 colonists sent to Jamestown were still alive. The Spanish and Portuguese had been playing American colonists for over 100 years already. The French had started colonizing the Caribbean and what would become Quebec just after the start of the 17th century. The Dutch had not yet purchased the island of Manhattan, but would later in the year, which would become Old New York, but was once New Amsterdam. In the east, an influenza pandemic is brewing in the Anatolian Peninsula and the area of modern-day Turkey. The disease will soon sweep across Europe through the port of Constantinople. Now it's Istanbul, not Constantinople, which is nobody's business but the Turks. This influenza will bring a swift but temporary halt to the conflict, slowly engulfing most of Europe. Between the war and the flu, some historical reports put population declines at over 50% in some places. The pandemic will spread across the ocean to the newly founded American colonies in the following year, lowering the survival rate even further, with some colonies seeing a drop in total population of over 1/3.
Problem.
I think there's a concept, I don't know if there's a name for it, but it's something I've identified that I think speaks to kind of the, what we've been talking about of identity and communication and need in a digital environment and faith and worship, like you were saying.
Yeah.
Is that there's a minimum need that can be met, right? We see this with like junk food, right? Like, are you going to feel better after some steak and potatoes? Yeah. But is there a Twinkie sitting there with the same number of calories and it'll do?
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you eat the Twinkie, do you still want the steak and potatoes? Maybe not.
Yeah.
Right. And it's the same thing with social interaction, right? Do I feel better if I hang out with some friends in person?
Yeah.
Yeah. But do I also have
But I got to
my
get
need
my car
met?
Yeah. Exactly.
Right. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of needs. There's a lot of things to do. And if I can get that need met by scrolling through Instagram for 10 minutes and seeing what my friends are doing, and I feel a little bit connected to them, right? And I think that applies across these concepts. Is, we hear stories of like AI girlfriends and stuff, which I have looked into some of these things and tried to play with them and see it, and they're awful.
Oh yeah.
Like the level of desperation you would need to find it even engaging at all is really, really low. But if you are that desperate, which is increasingly possible, it, as a married man with friends and kids and family, and it's kind of gross. But if it meets that need, then you're not going to pursue those bigger things.
Because they take effort, right?
They take effort. Right?
A physical relationship, and I don't mean physical as an intimate, but a real relationship takes some effort. And if you don't have to give any effort, or if the thing on the other end of this fake relationship doesn't really care, then it's easier, right? I think in life there's a lot of counterfeits, right? And I think there's some... Right, I have a religious perspective on that too. There's some divinity behind that, but there's a lot of counterfeits. Some things you described, like the Twinkie versus the steak, right? The virtual relationship versus a real relationship. These are these counterfeits, right? That using AI in a way that makes you devoid of social interaction or the reals. These are counterfeits to things that we have real needs for, things that we have a real human need to have, right? And I know there's a couple of sermons that I listened to, Elder David A. Bednar in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They're called Things as They Really Are. He's really hitting on this. Like, if you're trying to have a soulful experience, which is a combination of both spirit and body, if you're trying to have that kind of experience, but you're doing it virtually, you're having half the experience, right? Because you're not having the physical interaction. There's something about shaking a hand, giving a hug, looking somebody in the eyes, that you can't replace. You might think you can, but then I think the end result is what we're seeing now. It snowballs into an ultimate crash at some point, which I think we're seeing in society is a mental health crash. And I think the problem is people are starting to vote that way. right? Of what can I vote for that will give me immediate gratification? What can I vote for that will make me have some type of short-term satisfaction, right? And then politicians in some ways get hamstrung because they can't do the long-term initiatives because their constituents don't see the short-term benefit, right? And then in some of those ways, they get stuck, and we get stuck in these cycles where they're like, well, they just want to see something. I just got to deliver something tomorrow. So I'll let 10 years from now be somebody else's problem when 5 bridges are collapsing, and because they're just going to get mad that traffic's backed up. So I can't do that right now. It takes small issues like that. I think that's the problem. Society's moving in that direction, especially in the United States, where people are starting to vote that way.
Well, and I think there's and our listeners may have encountered this. I'm sure you have the attention market.
Yeah.
Right. That we kind of are constantly looking for new markets, right? We have this demand, this growth demand in our economy from our companies, and they constantly have to be able to grow to show shareholder value. And so once we've tapped out markets, right, we've got to look for a new market and commoditizing additional things, right? And so we're kind of trading on people's attention.
Yeah.
Right? And in regards to that and voting and things, I think we saw that in a big way in the 2025 Alabama legislature. And I don't expect that you spend a lot of time following
a little
the
bit,
legislature.
but I have.
But a lot of the bills, probably more than half of the bills that I was looking at, were for stuff that was already law, right? Like the biggest thing they passed was banning Glock switches.
Yeah.
They're already illegal.
That's a federal law.
It's already a felony.
Yeah.
It's already illegal under Alabama law.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like they're so focused on it. A lot of states now have like class D and E and some F felonies. A class F felony, and it's technically 1 year, but then in jail, but then like you don't get a year in jail. And like they're just making it a felony to make it a felony because they want to be big and tough, and they want the attention.
Buzzword,
right?
Man. Felony's the buzzword.
Right.
We did something about it's a felony, right? That's the buzzword.
They want to talk about. There was another one that they did last year that was in 2025. They did one on squatting, like taking over a house.
Right.
Right. There's no way to squat under Alabama law.
Yeah.
We don't have squatting, right? It's a common law practice of it, right? Which is often misunderstood. But to squat in Alabama, you need color of title, right? You need some dispute over who actually owns it, not just you moved in.
Right.
Right. And then that dispute still has to last 7 years. But there was a news article about it. And so they made a big deal out of it because it captured people's attention and everybody got riled up. And we've got to stop these moochers who are stealing houses from the banks that don't even know they're on their balance sheet.
Right. Because I think something happened in Texas that made the news, right? Where a guy moved into one where the mortgage company had gone bankrupt, and then he claimed adverse possession rights, right? It's like, did we need to waste, an entire session of the state legislature to do this? But I think that's a problem, and I think we see it with the federal Congress too, where in a lot of ways they don't want to rock the boat. They want to get as much attention as they can on both sides of the aisle. But then they've relegated a lot of their authority back to the executive branch because they don't want to have to vote on hard issues that are actually going to do things because they're polarizing. Even if they know it's the right thing to do, they don't want to be seen as a polarizing figure on whatever side of the aisle they're on. And the problem is, in a lot of ways, it hurts the checks and balances system, I think, of our federal government. Because now you're relegating a lot of authority back to the executive branch.
It breaks the system. Yeah,
it breaks the system. It breaks the system because for whatever reason in modern society, it's so hard to come together under a common flag, under a common, like, this is common sense. This is a good thing for us to do. I don't care what side you're on. But no, right? Things that used to be seen as common sense or, that makes sense. We got to protect it. They're not anymore, right? It's so polarizing. Things that shouldn't be, but are.
We lose track of our principles and our beliefs, and that we can disagree and still get along, especially if we have a few shared principles. I really love freedom. And I think I love it in a different way than a lot of people who like to run around and yell freedom do. Yeah. Because I see a lot of groups who like to yell freedom, and then their freedom is that they want the freedom to kind of trample on people and kind of force what they want. And it makes me sad because I think if they thought about it for a minute, right? But we've got this short attention span. I think it's sad.
It's a buzzword. And I think, I heard someone from New Zealand recently say, the Americans, they make a big deal about freedom. They talk about freedom, but in a lot of ways, they're like, if you look at some of the laws that we have and you have, I have got some more freedoms than you do in a lot of areas, right? And I think we slowly backed off into this box of we're under the banner of freedom, but freedom doesn't mean, right? And to back up a little bit on that same point, take some of the social issues that are captivating legislative sessions across the country, which I think shouldn't be. Let people do what they want to do. As long as it's not infringing on someone else's rights, I'm fine, right? Leave it alone. We don't need to keep making laws about this stuff. And we also need to let people do what they're going to do. If it's not infringing on your rights, if it's not forced upon you in some way, and people are just living their life, let people live. Let them live.
I agree.
Right. And I can have my own personal religious convictions, but that doesn't give me the right to go tell someone else that you have to agree with me and you have to live the way that I live. Right. As long as you're not telling me the same thing, we can mutually exist and be happy and be friends. I'm happy with that. I wish that society operated more that way than it does.
And I think it used to. I think there's always been plenty, especially in this country, of trying to force people into a particular set of moral beliefs or moral code, trying to legislate morality. But I think by and large, when our government functioned really well and we had a court system that cared and we had a legislature that cared and sometimes a president that cared, that we may have tried to do it, but we still let people have the freedom. And I worry that we're not doing that anymore.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think there are certain lines you have to draw, right, about objective morality. For example, you can't go kill whoever you want to kill, right? And I think the problem we see in society currently is, where do you draw the line? And I'm curious, I know you're interviewing me, but I am curious if you have thoughts on that. Where do we draw the line on objective morality?
I think it's got to be where it physically encroaches upon someone else's
freedoms.
Rights. Yeah. Well, and I think that there's a conversation to be had, and I don't know that anybody else has said this in the way that I've been thinking about it. But I've been looking a lot at politics recently. The Republican conservative side is very focused on individual liberties, individual rights, right? And that's kind of the way I've thought about it my whole life. And the left and the liberals and the Democrats have kind of always, maybe not always, but at least in my lifetime, focused on group rights and group responsibilities, which I've not had a big love for, that idea, that concept, right? And I tend to think of it more as any group is a collection of individuals. And so for things like the Citizens United case, I don't love the outcome, but from a corporate personhood standpoint, that has been the way that corporations have always interacted. And they've had, under law, rights, not because they have their own rights, but because they have the collective rights of the members of the corporation.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that we, or the founders, created a system trying to circumvent this cycle from monarchy to tyranny to aristocracy to oligarchy and to democracy to mob rule and back again, and trying to circumvent that with a separation of powers. And I think that in my reading of history, corporations weren't really a thing. The corporations that existed were the colonies, right? The Virginia Company, the
East India Trading Company.
The East India Trading Company, the New England Company, right? The companies were granted by royal charter from several different countries, but those were the colonies and the government.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we talk about rights, I see it as, yeah, the Constitution applies to the government and is saying the government can't do this because it's the Constitution of the government. It's the constituting document of the federal government and the union. But I think we need the principles of, we respect free speech, the principles of due process, the principles of self-defense, the principles of not searching and not seizing, the principles that everybody needs to be able to access healthcare and needs to be able to have free speech and talk and to worship as they choose, right? Because we don't know what the answers are.
Yeah.
We like to think we do, but if some of the greatest religious demagogues of today were to compare to the greatest religious demagogues of 100 years ago, they'd shoot each other.
Oh, sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we don't have the answers. And I think it's critically important that we allow people to practice life in different ways. And the ones that succeed will succeed, and the ones that don't won't.
Right. We give them
But
the freedom.
we don't have the right answers, right? We don't know as a society what's right. And more importantly, as a collection of individuals, we don't have the right to tell somebody not to if they're not hurting us.
Right.
Right. And so I think the line is there, but I think we need to look at it from a perspective of where is the line between an individual, a corporation, and the government? If all of those corporations and all of the government only exists in the minds of the individuals, what is that line? Is it just a restriction that when we said we're going to put this, effectively a corporation on top of all the other corporations and the people, is that the only one we want to limit? Or are these moral principles? Right.
Yeah.
And I think they're moral principles that, we shouldn't jump to conclusions. We should give somebody due process and let them have a chance to talk. And we should not quarter troops in their home.
Right. Yeah, I think that's fair.
I think that's the conversation we need to have next. And I think that's kind of the divide right now politically that I see between the Republicans and the Democrats, or the right and the left, is that maybe they're both right to a degree.
Sure.
Right. In the most fundamental sense is that, maybe the focus is on two sides of the same coin of respecting people and doing things that allow us to get along with them.
Yeah. Respect people, allow us to all get along with each other, but also preserve our individual rights and liberties. Yeah. And I think those are not at odds with each other. We've made them to be at odds with each other as a society. They shouldn't be, and they don't have to be, right? Our founding documents talk about how these civil liberties that we enjoy, these are inalienable rights. The government exists to protect and preserve those at the individual level. And I think when you start to see massive government overreach, my temperature check is often to say, does this pertain to help and protect and preserve my civil liberties? That's why we formed this construct, right? That we call the government, is for that purpose. Right. And certain social programs have their place, right? I hear these absolutists about, socialism's a bad word and all that. And I get it. I'm a conservative, right? I get it. But we don't want privatized police, right? We don't. There are certain things that I think we agree the government should provide for, and I'm happy to pay taxes into that so that they can provide for that. But I think there's a line. We shouldn't let it get too carried away. And I like your perspective of not trying to regulate rights and liberties at a group level, protect the individual rights and liberties, and respect them. But a lot of this has got to come because individuals want it. The government is only as good as the people who choose it and vote it in. And if the people start to have really skewed perspectives of society, either as a result of this technology, the information that they're fed by these addictive applications, which I think is the big driver today, or because of some, different perspective of the world, when those people start to let these abstract ideas control how they vote, ultimately the government will morph into that. That's the nature of a democracy. That's ultimately where it goes. And I fear that, right? And often the cycle that we see is you get knocked down really hard. You talked about the cycle from monarchy and into democracy, and then you go back to mob rule, and then back to
Polybius.
Yeah. Right, exactly. So I think that's what causes that cycle. You have to hit rock bottom and then realize, we pushed ourselves off into a corner. I want to voice again. And for a while, that voice is really good. There's an old adage that I used to share. You have different groups of people, and say you could apply this to women too. But they said, hard times make strong men. Mm-hmm. Strong men make easy times. Easy times make weak men, and weak men make hard times. So you've got this cycle. And I think we're in a cycle right now. This time's pretty easy, right? We're enjoying life. Life's pretty good. But what's that going to do? It's going to make weak politicians. It can make weak politicians. It can make weak contributing members of society who don't contribute. And then times get hard. And then people got to tighten that belt and get back in it. And then the cycle will happen. Unfortunately, I think it's inevitable. We try to influence it as much as we can, but I think it's going to happen.
We've got to have these conversations. We've got to be talking and focus on that, because I think we've got issues. I think COVID was a great example where we've got people that were making decisions that we had a lot of pandemic plans already in place. We didn't touch them. We didn't use them. We had a whole bunch of people who were elected officials who never read one of the briefing books on those plans, and they all existed. They all sat in every governor's office, and not a single one of them seemed to have opened them or touched them. We know how to deal with disease, and we didn't do it right. The lack of thought for the long-term consequences is an issue that we've got to look at.
I think at that point we're full circle there, right? Because as we talked about in the beginning, the technology makes us nearsighted.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happened. This attention grabbing, all that stuff, it made everyone nearsighted. So we didn't react for the long term.
So thinking about the long term, we've got a segment, Gotta Nail It. Gotta nail it.
Gotta nail it.
So this is something we want to ask everybody that comes on the show. And that is, what are the most important things we as a society have just got to nail it over the next 4, 40, and 400 years?
Yeah. Great. Right. And I thought a lot about this as we were preparing, and I think these are the right questions to be asking. So I think in the near term, what can we do? We got to get back into reality. We got to get out of this digital headspace. If we can get back in reality, we'll start truly observing, these are the things that actually matter. These are the things that I should actually be thinking about more. But if we can just get back into that space, in our own headspace as a society, I think it's going to drive what happens in the next one as we keep going forward. So to me, we got to get to this harmonious balance between how we're using the technology that I think right now is not harmonious, right? It is dominating everything. It's dominating our social life. It's dominating our political atmosphere. It's all about flashy short reel headlines. I get so annoyed by watching the congressional hearings that are televised, right? Well, that's the only ones I can see. But because you can tell they're just showboating for the camera, right? We got to get back to what really matters. Nobody's listened to the substance anymore.
Or they won't answer questions because they know if they don't, it's not a reel.
Right. Exactly.
Right. There's nothing to reel. There was it was months ago now, but one of the deputy chief of staff for the White House, when he accidentally said something he wasn't trying to say, he just stopped talking.
Yeah.
And then when the media cut it up for everything, they just didn't include it.
Yeah.
Right. And it was in the live. Everybody grabbed it, but it legitimately did not go as wide as if he'd actually finished talking or tried to justify it. He just stopped talking, and they acted like there was a feed disconnection. But it was clear that's not what happened, right? But it successfully short-circuited to a large degree the ability for somebody to run with that.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. And that was the point that I was thinking about for the 4-year mark, is this unrestrained kind of technology. It really erodes the attention. And by that point, nobody had the attention span to listen to dead silence because of the initial thing that he said. Because for me, I'm like, he comes back on, I want to hear how he finishes this. Or what's he going to say? What was he talking about before? But it erodes that attention, right? And we talked about mental health, physical health, how we identify ourselves, and how we're connecting with each other. I think that's a big part. But I think if we can nail that, the 4-year mark, then we can start to see further out. And then you take that 40-year mark, and you can start to innovate for the future in a way that you protect humanity. You build the guardrails now, instead of having to reverse engineer them way in the future. Often when I will do some of my public speaking engagements, I kind of go through a quick history of the internet, how we ended up where we are. And through that whole process with DARPA and Sputnik and how we started to have internet relay chats and all these things, there was no thought for security. There was the thought that somebody was going to use this to do something bad. No, it was the new shiny penny, right? People only spend their money on good things. It's the penny. So it was an afterthought. We've got to quit making security, not just cybersecurity, but our own physical security and protecting humanity, part of the engineering and development process, part of the innovation process now. And until we get our head out of our phones, we're not going to do it. We're not going to think about it. But I think that's what we can do in the next, especially in the 40 years, is start to build these ethical frameworks, these industry guardrails, and these security standards that will prioritize long-term well-being, human development, human interaction over short-term novelty or profit. Because the tech industry is dominated by short-term novelty and profit.
Well, and I think especially the ethics is those conversations aren't really happening.
No.
Certainly not at anything but the highest levels. Probably not the highest, maybe the second highest levels. But we're not having those conversations on ethics of how do we use this as a user? How do we use this as a customer, from the advertising side or the business that's using it, but also how do we use it as a developer of the technology itself, right? The censorship side of that. What kind of filters are we adding? What kind of things are we doing?
Well,
we're
and
not
I think
having
about
those ethical conversations about how we want to live our lives.
Yeah. And we're not, how does this affect my children, my grandchildren, those kind of things? Because those things matter too, right? I have developers who work for me, and they're brilliant individuals. And I've also worked a lot, especially as we've done a lot in public safety as a company. I meet people who are network engineers and technical engineers, but they do what they're paid to do, right? So if you're incentivizing your developers, your systems administrators to build something in this direction, they got to eat. They'll do it. So the thought process, conversation needs to happen at that next level. What are you incentivizing them to do? What kind of products are you incentivizing them to build? For example, take out the ethical argument. Just if I say, I want this out and I want it running by Friday, is it going to be as good as if I say, let me know what the biggest hurdles are. I want to make sure we get this thing locked down solid before we push it out, right? You can push it either direction. You can. And there's a tendency for immediate gratification, right? That I think comes out of these things. And that's the harder part. And I recognize we talk about building an ethical frameworks and all these kind of things. That opens up a whole nother can of worms where then there's a debate about, well, where do we draw the line? What do we consider ethical? What do we consider moral? When we're talking about the 40-year mark. But that's good. Then we can have the conversation, because right now we're not having the conversation.
Right, yeah. It would have been great if we started this 40 years ago.
Yeah, it'd be great.
But the internet didn't exist 40 years ago.
Exactly.
I guess the microprocessor did exist, but just barely.
Yeah.
And the level of innovation is fantastic, but it would have been great to start it before. But it's better to start it today.
Well, it's better
than 40
to start
years
it.
from now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think the innovation will slow as well. I think a lot of the investment in AI, especially, has been based on Moore's law.
Yeah.
For the listener, the concept that the capacity or the ability of a computer technology or electronics will double every 18 months.
Yeah.
And I think that we've kind of seen that Moore's law isn't really a law. And I think everybody looked at a big boost in AI that we got with ChatGPT from innovation done by Google and Google Labs that kind of has dropped off, at least, if not plateaued. And kind of the innovation that we're getting is larger models, not necessarily innovation itself.
Yeah.
Innovative ways to apply the technology.
Sure. And maybe that's where we need to be focusing, right? In better ways. Because what have we done with it? We turned it into a toy, right? And then we're using it to make funny pictures and do things. Not that long ago, I worked a ransomware case in public safety, and AI was a tool in that ransomware case. And the systems administrator and I are good friends. And he left that saying, I have seen a whole new way on how to use AI. And then it spread, and then I still get the text messages with the funny pictures, right? They came out of the AI building it or whatever. But using it as a tool to help make things better. If the goal is that we get back to trying to develop humanity and continue to support humanity physically, emotionally, spiritually, all those ways, and we start using the technology and building the technology to do that, then I think in 400 years, we'll have our society back on track. I think we can, right? If we can get out of our own way, if we can get our head out of the phone, if we can get back into really thinking that far out. It's hard to do. Everybody wants immediate gratification.
They do. I think we're wired for that.
Yeah.
But if we can set our priorities for, maybe if we can reduce scarcity enough with the technology that we can focus our priorities on relationships and institutions and media and art. This is my dream, however unrealistic it may be. But maybe if we can focus appropriately, then it won't matter what the new technology is.
Yeah.
Right. This is the current one, but how many other technologies have disrupted our society and our the whole world, whether it was transportation or telecommunications, but the internet, the microprocessor, electricity, the wheel, if we go back far enough, right? The major disruptors, the new technologies that interact with lots of industries. It's going to keep coming. And I think for a long time it didn't, thousands of years. it kind of wasn't that big of a deal, but we're pretty good at figuring this stuff out now.
Yeah.
And adding new stuff to it. And maybe it won't be that way forever, but if we can get our priorities straight, we can imagine an almost utopia style look at the world and technology and what it can do for us. And I don't think we'll achieve it. I don't think we really want to achieve it. But if we can focus on the relationships, if we can focus on the challenges and the elements of our life that are really worth living,
Yeah.
then maybe we can do that.
I like that. I think it's not unrealistic to hope for that, right? I think we've seen society come together at certain times and really make these pushes. But I do believe that it's going to take a mind shift. And unfortunately, those mind shifts often come because something bad happened.
So how do you think that we should approach developing those relationships and those institutions for those that time period that we can have for our health and our identity, our faith,
For building in the long term.
for building in the long term,
Yeah.
so that we can apply this.
I think we've got to get back to a point where we prioritize the human experience as a whole. If we truly value that, we will inevitably build our societies, our companies, our faith communities in a way that promotes that, right? And I'll say generally, religion, I think, is still good about promoting the human experience and about building it in a way that matters. The problem is, I don't know that there's a lot of other entities that are really prioritizing that anymore. I think there used to be, right? You had your bingo night and everybody went to. I know those still exist, but they're getting less common, right?
And they're getting more commercial too.
They're getting more commercial,
Yeah.
right? The Rotary clubs, bingo, even Freemasonry, right? These things promoted some level of human interaction and humanity, and they're becoming less and less, or they're getting more commercialized. And I think that's a problem. And then we try to look to the government to fill that void, or technology to fill that void. And that's never what it was intended to do. It was never intended to do that. So I think ultimately, if we can reprioritize the human experience, then it'll drive the way we develop. It'll drive the way we innovate, because then we'll look at our technologies. What can I do to enhance the human experience, not replace it or offset it? We'll build technologies that do that. There'll be another tech wave, right? AI is the big thing right now. It's here to stay. I don't think it's going away. I think it's going to keep getting better. It's going to be a tool in our arsenal, just like the other technologies that we have. But I hope to see more tech waves that promote the human experience in greater ways, in bigger ways, rather than replace it. I'm not saying that AI is built to replace it, but I think, unfortunately, some people are using it that way. Not everyone.
You were talking about security a minute ago and what AI can do for cybersecurity and building. Especially building for security, right? We're talking about things like IRC and email. We're not invented with security in mind, right? If I get an email from my doctor and it's an encrypted email, it's not really an encrypted email. It's a link to go to a website that's encrypted, right?
Yes.
We've added encryption to the internet through SSL certificates, but it's only on the World Wide Web,
Right.
It's only through HTTP. It's not through email. It's not through IRC. It's, we have some very interesting ways that we've adapted with apps like Signal.
Yeah. It depends on how you do it, right? Because you've got, and it's interesting. Maybe I can go on a tangent about encryption for a minute, because it makes me
I'm all about encryption, because I think we're fundamentally unprepared for not the AI threat, but the quantum computing threat.
Yeah. And I have a blog on OTM Cyber's website about that. What are the implications of quantum computing on encryption, and where is that going to take us? And I think it's a little more nuanced than a lot of people realize, but it's a real thing. So a lot of people have asked me before, how did we end up in this whole thing with encryption? It really started as a U.S. Navy project. And it came out of the whole code talkers thing from World War II, right? Where you realize people listen to your radio communications, you start speaking in code, and then all of a sudden you realize you could do more and more with it. Well, we could code the entire signal so we don't have to speak differently, right? It turned into this whole thing driven out of communications. And it's all out of that one thing, right? You and I have something we want to keep confidential. We don't want anybody else hearing it. That's where encryption started.
Well, and even Julius Caesar was encrypting his dispatches.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And it was a simple number to letter cipher.
At least in code.
And it never got broken. It's the first form of encryption, if you learn about encryption, that is taught.
That came from there. Yeah. And that methodology is still used in a lot of places, right? The Japanese said that the most sophisticated form of encoding that we used was the Navajo Code Talkers, right? We took a modified form of the Navajo language and used it for radio operators in the Marine Corps, and they never broke it. They never broke it because it was that different, But that's where all this started. And it's, if you look back at our technology far enough, almost all of it, especially the beginnings of it, came from some military project somewhere. It all did. The internet came when the Russians launched Sputnik, and we realized our intelligence communities weren't sharing information with each other. And that's how it started ARPANET, right? All these things come out of that.
Necessity is great for innovation.
It is, right? But what drove that, it was the human need to survive. Yeah. And now it's the human need to be entertained, right? We've replaced that. Yeah. So again, we come full circle back to this, going back to building humanity in some kind of way. But anyway, on this whole thing with encryption, right? We've seen a lot of technical standards be adopted. The problem is we had different protocols for every different communications channel at one point, right? Like you had POP3 and SMTP and these different email type communications. And then you ended up where, hypertext transfer protocol, we could just add S on it, make it secure, and then we're using HTTPS, which is all SSL. It's all TLS, SSL stuff. Now that's just the new standard for everything, right? These cloud-hosted email servers, they all run over SSL, right? So now we're using the same protocol for everything, and it makes the internet a bit messy. I think there are better ways we could do encryption in a lot of those ways. I do think that quantum computing is on the verge of the big wave because we're finding areas where it has the capability to really enhance our AI. And I think we're going to see more of that. But the ability for a quantum computer to break certain encryption algorithms is astronomically greater or more capable than any other technology we've had previously. What used to take maybe a few decades or even centuries can now be done in a couple of days or maybe a couple of minutes. And it depends on the standard. That blog post dives into it in a lot more detail, and I won't go into it here, but there are certain algorithms that we use where it's not going to make a difference. The quantum computing technology isn't going to break it like everybody thought, it'll just break all encryption. Not quite, right? But it's going to change the way we play the game. It's certainly going to change the way we play the game. And that's a big deal.
So what is it not going to break?
It depends. So I would need to pull back up the research document that I did from Google, but it depends on how the encryption algorithm is formulated, right? If we're still talking binary and not exponential binary strings, then the way that quantum computing has to factor the encoding or defactor the encoding isn't as beneficial. So it still ends up, even though now you can do it quantumly, where both cases can be true at once, the formula is still long enough that it's not as much of an enhancement as it would be otherwise. Okay. So there's a break-even point in your encryption algorithms and encryption methodologies where quantum computing doesn't provide quite as much benefit as some people thought.
Well, and just I've done a little bit of math trying to understand some of the capability of the factoring encryption, right? And the difference. There was a article that I was reading about the radio system used in Europe that's equivalent to our P25 system in the US. And we're generally using 256-bit encryption.
Right.
And their system in Europe is using 128. But it was discovered that actually it really wasn't. It was using more like 56, 56-bit encryption. And so I was trying to get in and see like, what's the actual number of difference? How many times more impressive is 256 versus 128? And the number of how many times greater it is just astronomical.
Oh, yeah. When you start dealing with exponential numbers, those exponential factors, your mind can't wrap its head around that.
No, it's the number that explains the number of zeros they are is too large for me to understand. Yeah. Right. And so to defactor that, right, the number of computations that it would take to defactor that, and at its base, it's a replacement. It's just a really complicated number letter cipher to begin with.
Sure.
Right. When you really get down to it, but what we've got with public keys and private keys, I don't like the fact that we've only used SSL and then embedded it into HTTP because and there's some other use cases for it, but I don't like the way that we've built it into the technology so well that the average user doesn't know it's there.
Yeah.
Right. We've taught them look for the lock symbol in your
browser,
URL bar. Right. Yeah. But I think it disconnects them from the reality of encryption. And I think that if we can get people to engage more with their private keys and their public keys, I think it will lend to a better environment.
Well, then you're a custodian of your own security.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
And I think there's a benefit to that in a big way. You see that with a few apps, right, where the private key is locally held and you have to know that it's there and these types of things. And those are huge because you look at some of these scandalous situations in the past where some of the big tech companies were either paid or just told by federal entities, I need you to give me access to this information. They just did it. But you take technologies like that, they no longer have the ability to do that. They don't have either side of the keychain, so they can't do it. They can't break it. I think that's one reason why we've seen Signal become such a big deal in the intelligence community. It's being used a lot between informants and agents to share information. It's because of that. There's local security that the big tech companies don't have, that they can't pull. And I agree.
We've got an encryption that works really well. I just think we need to probably, and I don't know enough about the capabilities of quantum computing because they don't exist yet. But it would seem from a pure math standpoint that we need to possibly just increase the factoring more because it's very easy to do it from the private key into the encrypted space and then from the public key to decrypt. But we kind of settled on 256.
Yeah.
Because I know when that was all coming about, it was, there were different ciphers available and you could, I had an encryption program that you could choose.
Yeah.
Between
256.
Or
3 DES or
there was a fish.
Yeah.
And, and you could layer them and you could do different combinations of the 3 and then, stack them up and then you could choose between 128 and 256 and 512 and, you could really scramble what you had.
Yeah.
And I don't know any current applications of 512-bit encryption. I know they exist, but
it's not in common use, right? I think I've seen it in some government circles, but
it doesn't take that much longer to do.
It's
moderately more computing power because actually, I guess the current ones we're using aren't really based on prime numbers as much as some of the other ones were.
Yeah.
But the factoring and the math of it, it's very easy when you know the solution to do it, and we know that from doing algebra.
Yeah.
Right?
It's an algebra problem.
Yeah.
It really is. I think what ultimately we're going to see with quantum computing as it enters the encryption game, as we're going to use it, it's going to change our encryption algorithms. There's going to be new ones. And I think we'll use quantum computing to encrypt and decrypt. I think is ultimately where we're going to see it come first. And then I think we'll see lots of other use cases and applications too. But I think ultimately that's where a lot of this is going to start. But this idea, right, in the early days of the internet, this is what you did. You wanted to break encryption. You let some computer run, you run it for a while. Those things are still out there, right? They still exist. But it's not the primary way that threat actors gain access to information anymore. They used to say hackers used to break in. I say now they sign in. So they stopped hacking through encryption and they started hacking people as saying, I can trick you into giving me access to what I want. And I don't have to worry about any of that. But that's where, to your point, this whole concept comes in of they don't even know it was encrypted. They don't even know what that means, right? Everything's hypertext transfer protocol secure. Everything's SSL, but it's just becoming de facto, so they don't think much about it. It's changed the way cybersecurity works too, because used to, there was a lot of power in network analysis. If you captured the network packets, you could reconstruct everything. But now the large majority of it's encrypted, even on the local network. So now you're having to look more for patterns,
right,
or certain trends to help you identify what's really going on versus some other construct.
Right.
It changes everything in those ways.
Yeah. Well, and the hacking the people, the social engineering, right?
Yeah.
That's been around forever.
Oh, yeah.
And every time it gets brought up in a class or cybersecurity training, or I'm talking to somebody about it, or I'm sure when you talk about it, there's always a decent segment of whoever's there who's aghast, as if they've never heard of this.
Yeah.
And they're complicated confidence scams.
Yeah.
Right? Like they've existed forever, in the modern sense, really pioneered by Kevin Mitnick.
Yeah. His book, Ghost in the Wires, is a good read.
It is. I have Art of Persuasion and his other art of book, whose name escapes me at the moment, sitting on my bookshelf.
But that's how he did what he did.
Yeah.
Right?
That's
really
how he did.
Ultimately people.
Yeah. Like he knew the technology, but the things he went to jail for was making a phone call and asking for stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an amazing story. It amazes me that people still don't see that they're the security element, right? And people really need to. There's a point at which the ignorance of the way that the technology works and the way security works isn't going to cut it anymore.
Yeah.
We know there are complicated attack vectors and sophisticated attackers that can use the data and can use access. And we've got to find a way to convince people that their security matters, and that, you probably hear it a lot of, well, who am I? Why do they want my stuff? Right.
I hear that all the time, but they take what they can get. The goal is just don't be the low-hanging fruit. And you can make it complicated. Like I see so many people still don't have locks on their phones, and your whole life's on there. It's worth something, right? And I think you can kind of use security and privacy synonymously in certain cases. And I always say Americans, for the most part, they've traded their privacy and their security for some level of convenience. And if you're willing to make that conscious decision for whatever it is, fine. That's your call to make. But again, it's back to informed consent. People don't realize how encryption works. They don't realize how much of themselves they're putting out there into the open world, or is that easily accessible. And that's where I have a problem with it. I think these big tech vendors should be more accountable to tell people this is what you have. And unfortunately, right, I saw this as we kind of entered the cybersecurity space. If you wanted to be secure, then you better have a lot of money, right? You want to be secure, you better have deep pockets. Even when we entered the cybersecurity space in public safety, the industry standard was, unless you were 40, 50 seat center, you couldn't afford it. It was out of your budget. That's something I'm really proud of that OTM Cyber did. We changed the game. We made security affordable to the 1-2 seat centers. So then all of our competitors, they had to come to the table with an offering for the little guys. And I'm proud of that.
Some of them went out of business because you came on the market.
It's true.
I saw it happen.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And it's not that we just had the ability to scale our solution up and down. The truth is they did too. But you say, well, why go after this 1-2 seat public safety center when I could get a lot more money going after this big one? And my response to that is, because we all have to live here. This is my nation. I live in a rural community, and I want them to have the same level of security that New York City does. It shouldn't be any different. Security shouldn't be a financial factor. And that's part of my driving force behind the company is, and for all Americans, it should be accessible to the everyday person. It should be the default.
It should.
It should be harder in some ways to be insecure than it is to be secure. But it's not the case. And until the vendors who build the technologies in public safety, pick any industry, until they're incentivized to build it secure from the ground up, they won't. Until the people who are putting out the RFPs or who are buying the products on the consumer market are saying, what encryption standards are you using here? How are you securing my data at rest? How does your remote support tunnel, how is it secure and encrypted and maintained? Until they start asking those questions, there's no incentive for the vendors to innovate in that direction. And they won't.
No.
They won't.
No.
Because it's the bottom line. The bottom line is that dollar. It costs money to build those things. So why spend the money on it unless everybody's asking about it?
Mm-hmm. So
in some of my public speaking engagements, I'll say, when you put out an RFP, right? And here I am talking about government entities and stuff, but if you're going to put out an RFP, you make sure that those are questions and requirements in the RFP from the ground up. You get a new CAD system, you get a new call delivery system, right? You get a new radio system. Build it in there, because then they can't respond unless they have a good answer, or they may try, but they disqualify themselves. So then they say, well, man, everybody's putting this in the RFPs. We better start building it. Same thing with going back to innovating towards protecting humanity. Until the consumer and the end user really cares about that element, there's no incentive to build for it. Unfortunately, that's how capitalism works.
Yeah.
Right?
What do you think is the level of technology understanding, like of skill with computers and networks and security, that the head of an entity needs to have to, right? Because you've got to have an amount of understanding to be able to hire, to be able to get a vendor and manage a vendor appropriately. Obviously, you're offering from OTM Cyber a solution for outsourcing that. And I think that it's desperately needed, and you're definitely filling that need. But to get to that point where it's built in from the ground up,
Yeah.
You know, is that something we can entirely outsource? Or do we need to start stepping up who we're hiring?
No, I think
for
everything,
directors and
I think everything's a
executives.
partnership, and I think it always will be.
Yeah.
Right? There's going to be some involvement from the private sector, right, which is where my company exists, and the public sector, but it's got to be a partnership. And this has been one of my leadership philosophies, right? Number one, if I'm the smartest person in the room, then I need to find another room. So if you've built your entire leadership model, if you're a director or a leader of an organization around being the smartest person in the room, it's not good for you. So recognizing, number one, they're not going to be the expert in cybersecurity. They're not going to be the expert in these things, but they better surround themselves by people who are. So if I should be asking that question, for example, if I'm the director of the organization, I should be asking, how much should I be prioritizing security and how do I do it? Well, let me find a trusted confidant, if not a consultant or a third-party organization, just to ask questions to. Tell me how I should be having that conversation. What should that look like, right? It does drive culture down from the top. I've gone into several public safety environments or even other types of government entities where you can tell security is not a priority. And you sit down with the sysadmin, they get it. They know the technology. They know the latest and greatest MDR solutions out there. They know that that's an end-of-life system. And then you ask them, well, why haven't you done it? Well, leadership doesn't want to pay for it. It's a, in technology, we have the OSI model, right? We always say that's a layer 8 problem. Layers 1 through 7 are the different technology stacks. The bottom is the physical layer, and then you go up, and the top is the applications, the way it looks. Layer 8's the money, right? So we say, oh, that's a layer 8 problem. They don't know what you're talking about. It means it's a money problem, ultimately. But why did they get to that point? It's because their leadership team made it clear at some point that they don't prioritize that themselves. Just like I talked about with my developers. If I'm like, I don't care how good it is, I want it working by Friday, they will duct tape and super glue something together and we'll be fixing it for the next 3 years, right? Same is true in these industries. So I think they don't, for a director, for an organizational leader, they don't have to understand the technology well enough or super well to know that it's important. And then they could just ask the question, like, look, I hired you to be my technology director. What matters? What should we be caring about that we're not? Let them tell you, well, we're not prioritizing security. Okay, what do we need to do about that, right? And then they say, well, I need this much money. And in your mind, you may be saying, well, that competes with something else. And then lay the problem out. Well, how do you balance that with this other problem that we have? Counsel with the people who work for you. And they'll often tell you, they often will. So I don't think you got to be a technical expert, but you got to be willing to listen, and you got to surround yourself by people who know what they're doing. Don't surround yourself by idiots. Otherwise you end up just magnifying idiocy, right? That's what happens.
It's a common problem, especially in government.
Oh, it is, especially in government, right? Yeah. It is.
Do you see enough training available to get somebody, those decision makers, to that level, right? Like in GIS on our consulting side, we see that if you want to be a GIS professional, there's a lot of training. You can get a degree in geographical information systems, right? But the level that a general consumer would be using for digital and electronic maps is not where like a 911 director needs to be in managing their GIS solutions, right? And there's not a lot of training, if any, in that middle space.
Yeah.
Right. They don't need, if they go to an Esri solution or something, it's going to be way above their head for somebody who's just trying to get into it. And they don't need to spend, a lifetime trying to get into that. But at the same time, they do actually need to know some of the technical.
Yeah.
I haven't really seen that available for networking. It's very common for somebody to either have a degree or be self-taught, which takes years, if not decades, to do, right? Almost everything I know is self-taught, or a lot of what I learned about telecommunications and networking and security, I did by grabbing vendors as they came to fix or touch anything.
Yeah. And
pick the crap out of their brain of everything they knew.
Right.
And go from there. And I've been doing that for decades now, which is a weird thing to say that I'm that old. But but there's no formal training in a lot of technical spaces. Do you see it available in cybersecurity?
I do. Yes and no, right? Because this is the thing. There are degree tracks now where you can go out and just get a degree in cybersecurity and come out. That's not how the industry was when I started, right? Typically, the pathway into cybersecurity was you became a technologist first, whether you were a developer or you were a network administrator, you were a systems administrator, you had made some entry into IT, and then cybersecurity was your graduate level. So you moved that way. In some ways, that's still true, right? If you're going to be an operator, call it an operator in cybersecurity, there's still a lot of truth to that. But if you just want to know enough to surround yourself by good tech and good people, I think there are paths to do that without a massive learning curve. Some of it is just being aware, attending technical forums where they're presenting new technologies and asking questions, right? But I would kind of fall back to start with the basics. If you're a director or someone of an equal position, start with the basics of, yes, security matters. I don't fully know what that means. I do, but say they wouldn't. They don't fully know what that means. But if they just keep saying it, we care about security here. What are we doing about security here? What are we doing to be secure? The people who do know what that means and who do know how to procure and get that technology and what that technology looks like, so they feel enabled. So I don't think you have to really be that much of a technical expert in it to care about it. And inevitably what will happen if you do care about it, you keep asking questions, like you said, picking brains of even people who work for you, then you're going to learn a lot.
You're going to learn a lot, yeah.
And that's good enough.
Well, I'll say one thing that I see as a possible future outcome here over the next 40 years is I see the possibility of a renaissance in humanity as almost a pushback against AI, of trying to live life, of trying to experience life, of trying to have, I think we'll see more plays instead of movies as AI.
Emotionally attached experiences.
As Hollywood starts to use AI in movies, I think we'll go back to plays more. I think as we get AI written books, I think we'll get, I don't know, you can still write it and put it in print, but I think we'll get more physical books. I think we'll get more people who deliberately choose to interact in person, even
in the physical,
even if just to be next to each other. I'm hopeful that this can be the bottom, right? We're talking about the cycle of government and Polybius, and maybe this can be our cycle that we say, no, we want humanity. And there are so many great things. I think movies are great. I think recorded music is great, right? But there's nothing quite like a live performance.
Yeah.
Right. Whether it's a play or an orchestra or music, or, restaurants know that, right? They have live music, right? And it brings people in.
It does. It works.
It does. And I think there's something to the good bits of life. And I think we'll see that more. I think we'll see people talking in person more. I think we'll see them maybe writing letters more to communicate. I also think what I would love to see, and maybe it's something that, I can do, maybe it's something we can do, but the ownership of encryption, maybe that goes back to a handwritten cipher.
Taking full ownership of just your data in general.
Yeah.
Through that.
As we've seen AI kind of being used to mass farm social engineering for scams and convince people that, somebody needs help, or their loved one's been arrested and they need to send them money for a bail and that kind of thing, right? As we're seeing more of that, one of the things that me and my wife have been talking about is confidence words, dress words, and words to verify, like in World War II on D-Day, right? Lightning and thunder. But a friend or foe, just call and response, and words to verify identity. I'm hopeful that we can take ownership of encryption and of life. I'm hopeful to see that.
Yeah, to your point,
so
I hope you're right. I hope we do see this shift. I think that's what humanity needs. But I think humanity in a lot of ways can be self-correcting, as George Bush said of democracy, right? That it can be self-correcting if we let it. When people start to realize they have a void, or they are devoid of these experiences, I hope you're right. I hope we'll see people shift back to what mortality was intended to be.
Yeah.
Right? That's my hope.
Yeah. Okay. So to end the podcast, my hope is to talk to every guest and ask them this question. And so a little context for it. So during the 2nd century BC, there's a Roman senator, Cato the Elder. He was reported to have finished every speech with some variation of the phrase, Carthago delinda est. Carthage must be destroyed. Cato believed that even though Carthage had been defeated in the Second Punic War, that they remained an existential threat to Rome, and believed it important enough that he would add the statement to the end of any speech he gave, no matter the topic. So we want to ask each guest, what is your Carthage? What thing, good or bad, are you passionate about telling people?
I believe my Carthage is guardrails around tech. Don't innovate blindly. Keep the guardrails around the technology. We talked a lot about it, but this industry has a problem with chasing novelty, shiny penny, the quick buck with little to no foresight for long-term societal consequences. We build faster than we can evaluate or contemplate the impact it's going to have. Tools become addictive instead of empowering. Systems become fragile instead of resilient. Human experience becomes secondary to digital engagement. I believe technology is a stewardship, and it needs to be guided with restraint, purpose, and security, or it's going to shape society in ways that we can't unwind. And that's the fight I keep showing up for. It's my vision behind cybersecurity and OTM cyber, and I believe that's the ultimate case that we need guardrails around tech.
That's great, Jamie. Thank you for helping build a resilient, safe, and sustainable future.
Thank you. I'm glad to be a part of it. I hope we've at least made a little difference somewhere.
Hi, this is David Morgan. I want to thank you for listening to The Common Construct.